Good morning from New York City. In this presentation, I'm going to review some books related to the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project, which is the code name for the project making the atomic bomb during World War II. Okay? Which finally ended the war. Some people say it didn't end the war. Some people say the coming of Russia into the war ended the war. No. The two atomic bombs ended the war. The Japanese had committed some atrocities, and the United States, the people of the United States, felt okay about dropping them. That's a long story. We won't go into that today. This is just about books. Some people who are involved in this whole situation, it all begins with Einstein in 1905, special relativity, E equals mc squared, right? That was indirect. Not quite, because in around 1939, Einstein signed a letter. He didn't draft it. A fellow called Leo Szilard, see on the board? Yeah. Was aware of the possibility that an atomic bomb could be made. And he was worried, and they were worried, that the Germans might make one. So, he got Einstein to sign the letter that he drafted, 2 pages, to FDR, right? The President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. 3 months later, Roosevelt wrote back to Szilard saying, "Thank you, I think that's a good idea. Thank you for pointing this out to me. We will set afoot the project, which is going to be called the Manhattan Project." He didn't have that code name at the time, but he set the wheels in motion to start making the atomic bomb. And it was a massive endeavor, okay? And there are a lot of books about it. And some of the names would be Einstein, Helen Strassman, there should be an N behind that. Helen Strassman, fission, early fission, splitting of the atomic nucleus. Lisa Meitner, Otto Frisch, Leo Szilard, Rudolf Peierls had a big role in it, it's understated. Fermi, Enrico, without him there would be none. First sustainable nuclear reaction in the University of Chicago. Soddy and Rutherford, who looked at the nucleus. Now, during the project itself, these are the people who began the science. And believe it or not, most of these people were inspired by H.G. Wells. Various different books that he wrote inspired lots of things, like time travel, special relativity, a whole lot of things. But he talked about a super bomb, in one of his books, I can't remember the name of it. That was the atomic bomb, and it did all sorts of nasty things. Now, the actual project itself involved J. Robert Oppenheimer, Hans Bethe, Robert Serber, who I like, and of course Feynman is in there just because I'm a fan. He was only a small person in it. And in his book, Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, he has an essay, Los Alamos from Below. That means he wasn't a higher up in Los Alamos. Bob Wilson recruited him, and all the other people from Princeton, they were recruited en masse and brought down to Los Alamos, which is near Santa Fe, New Mexico. So that's one of the books that will feature, just because it's indirect. Many other people, chemists. I tend to be a physicist, so I forget chemists, but a major role was played by Kistiakowsky. Kistiakowsky invented the explosion. He constructed the implosion device using explosives. He was an explosives expert, and his project was first developed by a fellow called Niedermeyer, but he was fired because some people didn't like him for certain reasons. I don't know. Now, the whole project was really, some people say Oppenheimer is the father of the atomic bomb. I tend to think that Leslie Groves was. Leslie Groves he was a colonel, and then he was made a general. He asked to be made a general, and they said okay, because he wanted to have a big name to operate with these big names and supervise them. Leslie Groves did many projects for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So, for example, the Pentagon. He supervised the building and organized the building of the Pentagon and many other things. Leslie Groves. He was some cookie. And he ended up having a great relationship with Oppenheimer. They were different kinds of people, but because their relationship was very symbiotic, it helped the project to get done. Nobody else had done this before. Now, there were thousands of people involved in this project. They were involved mostly, the brains were in Los Alamos, New Mexico. But there were two other main places, Oak Ridge in Tennessee and Hanford Engineering Works in Washington State, doing different jobs. For example, the big job of the atomic bomb was actually not to make the bomb itself. It was extracting uranium-235. Uranium comes with several different isotopes in a sample. Uranium-238, that means 238 nucleons in the center, right? 92 from that leaves what? 146. 146 neutrons and 92 protons. Now, to be uranium, you have to have 92 protons, right? But you can change the isotopes. By changing the number of neutrons, you get a different isotope. So, there's an isotope of uranium-235 in any sample of uranium, and it's 0.07%. Yeah? So it's small. So the job for making the atomic bomb involves extracting this guy and enough to make what's called critical mass. We'll talk about that later. I don't want to talk too much technicals because you don't know who's listening to this. I just want to review the books. What else will I say about that? Anyway, the project went on and on and on, and so a key player in this was J. Robert Oppenheimer. Now, Oppenheimer had already been a great physicist. He didn't get a Nobel Prize or anything, but he did some major work. He did some work. There's an Oppenheimer-Volkoff limit. The Oppenheimer-Volkoff limit is to do with collapsing neutron stars. I got this book October the 10th, 1949, Life. Now, when I was reading the article on Oppenheimer in this, it was extremely well written. You don't get articles written like that nowadays. The other thing that struck me was throughout the magazine, that's just Life magazine, there were very risque ads, you know. I can't explain it. It's just the way they were written. The you know, women's underwear and stuff like that. It's very risque. Anyway, Life magazine from 1949 talks about Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb. Father? I don't know. Could have been Leslie Groves. Now, the very first book you should read if you want to start learning about this stuff is Richard Rhodes' definitive work, The Making of the Atomic Bomb. Richard Rhodes. I got an email from him. Got a Pulitzer Prize, of course. It's a definitive work of 800 pages approximately. It's extremely well written because the writer is a master and he leaves no stone unturned. It covers all the details of the projects, including photographs. Here's a photograph of Szilard, Curie, lots of people. Enrico Fermi, he's in there. Enrico Fermi. I was looking for I. Rabi. A main feature in this whole project is one of the great scientists, I should have put him on the board, is, along with Fermi, I. Rabi. The reason I mention him is because I had the great pleasure of having lunch with I. Rabi in the Brewery School cafeteria in 1986, or it could have been 85, round about there. And of course, I didn't fully appreciate his work. I was more interested in what he had to say about knowing Feynman. I didn't know that he worked along with Oppenheimer and all these people at the time, although he did talk about it. He talked about the Manhattan Project at length. So I wasn't fully aware of his full involvement. In fact, during the project, he already had the Nobel Prize. I didn't know when I was having lunch with him that he had the Nobel Prize. Anyway, that's Richard Rhodes' definitive work. Even if you just got this book, you'd be going well. Covers the history and the characters. Now, a great book by Cynthia Kelly, edited by, with an introduction by Richard Rhodes, the person who wrote that book, edited by Cynthia Kelly, is The Manhattan Project, the birth of the atomic bomb in the words of its creators, eyewitnesses, and historians. In this, you will get essays written by Oppenheimer, General Rhodes himself writing essays. Let's see if I find Rabi in here. Yeah. Anyway, Rabi has an essay or two in here also. Okay, this is an awesome book because it's in the words of the creators. It's written in it's a collection of essays. There's even an essay by Feynman in here. The essay that Feynman wrote in Surely You're Joking. Surely You're Joking has an essay in it, Los Alamos from Below. Let me find it. But I think it's duplicated in here, or partially at least. Now, Los Alamos from Below is a must-read, right? It's in Surely You're Joking. He has several other essays in here. And of course, it's very easy to read Feynman. His English flows. Now, General Leslie Groves features a lot because he managed the whole project and he kept a low profile. You know, they said Robert Oppenheimer is the father of the bomb. It's debatable. I kind of lean towards Leslie Groves. He was the real manager. And of course, General Leslie Groves wrote his own book, Now It Can Be Told, the story of the Manhattan Project, introduced by Edward Teller. Now, if you don't know who Edward Teller is, Edward Teller worked on the Manhattan Project, but he worked on what he called the super. It was known that there was a possibility of an even more powerful bomb than the one that involved nuclear fission, and that was nuclear fusion. And here's a statement. For nuclear fusion, you need to fuse deuterium and deuterium to get tritium, I think. I can't remember. I'd have to work it out and put it on the board. Or maybe hydrogen and hydrogen to get deuterium. Whatever it is anyway, you need to stick nuclei together and you get fusion instead of fission. Fission is splitting and fusion is joining. And in fusion you get much more energy. Of course, the super turns out to be the H-bomb. Awesomely frightening. So Edward Teller really pushed that. He's in there. But this is the book by Leslie Groves, talking his own side of the story. And he gives great detail. But this book is, for me, it's all about leadership. Him selecting people, selecting Oppenheimer, selecting people for their various different jobs. Really, that's what he talks about. And why people are good at things and some people are not. And how to keep them all working together. This is a great book on leadership. I wanted to send this book down to a colonel. I was supposed to give a talk at the United States Air Force and I screwed up. Won't go into the reasons what happened. I was just exhausted. I got off the plane and I should have gone there a week before, but you know, I was jet lagged and I was exhausted. I was also scared. I didn't know where I was on foot. And of course the distances were huge and I had to get from, where was it? Anyway, a long distance to Colorado Springs. And I just couldn't quite make it and I didn't give the talk and I felt awful. To this day I still feel terrible. Okay, so the next thing we'll do is we'll look a bit at books on Oppenheimer himself. J. Robert Oppenheimer of Life magazine. One of the first books I read was J. Robert Oppenheimer, Letters and Recollections, edited by Alice Kimberly Smith and Charles Wiener. And it's a collection of letters. A lot of them are to his brother. Those ones I tend not to read. But I do read letters that he wrote to Groves and other people that are relevant to the Manhattan Project. But there are a lot of letters here from his professorial days, out there in Caltech where he was and different places. And a lot of his physics work is in here. Here's one to Leslie Groves. Yeah? This is a very good book. You have to have it on the shelf if you want to have a full library of these books. Sorry about that. My camera slipped. I hope it didn't slip too badly. I'll have to do the presentation again if it did. Another one, The Ruin of J. Robert Oppenheimer. I haven't really read all this fully, but J. Robert Oppenheimer was accused of being a communist, and he was suspected of that all his life. So various forces, mainly under a guy called Strauss, came after him after the World War II and, ruined his name. I have a story. My very first physics teacher was David Bohm. He was also accused, probably was, a communist, and he was on the Manhattan Project. He was a student of J. Robert Oppenheimer. He was my first physics teacher, and that was in Birkbeck College, London. Why was he in Birkbeck College, London? Because his communistic leanings caused him to be run out of America. They didn't like him. David Bohm. He was a good physicist. Yeah. The definitive work on the life of J. Robert Oppenheimer is American Prometheus, The Triumph and Tragedy of J. Robert Oppenheimer by Kai Bird and Martin Sherwin. It is an awesome work of literature and history. Fantastic book. Now, if you want to learn some of the technicalities of the bomb, behind the bomb, and how things were done. This is a picture of Oppenheimer, by the way, looking at the gadget. They had a code word for the implosion bomb. There were two bombs. How can I put it? The uranium bomb and the plutonium bomb. Uranium involved just bringing cores together enough to make critical mass, and implosion made critical mass by compressing plutonium. This is called critical assembly, and it's very technical. If you like technical stuff, it's good. If you don't, you shouldn't have it. But it's always a good reference, even if you don't like technical stuff. Now, for an account of the relationship between Groves and Oppenheimer, they respected each other, didn't necessarily like each other. Groves chose Oppenheimer to be the director of the Manhattan Project. This is called The General and the Genius, well, they were both geniuses, by James Kunetka. The General and the Genius, Groves and Oppenheimer, the unlikely partnership that built the atomic bomb. And they worked together. And there's the gadget. That's the plutonium bomb. The plutonium that involved an implosion, and it was spherical. Some people call it Fat Man. Now, you saw this cover. This is the photograph from which that was taken. That's the gadget. And the gadget was hoisted up on a tower in a place called Alamogordo, New Mexico. And that was the very first test that mankind had of such a weapon. Who else have we got here? Yeah, they brought it up on a 100-foot high tower. There it is going up. That was in Alamogordo, New Mexico. And it went off with a bang. First nuclear test. Now, this is the little boy. This was the fission bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. The round bomb, Fat Man, and there's Groves and Oppenheimer after its test. The round bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. This keeps moving. Sorry. Now, indirect books associated with this would be a very interesting account. Still at it. Okay. A very interesting account. The Los Alamos Primer by Robert Serber. Robert Serber had been a student of J. Robert Oppenheimer, and he gave a series of lectures introducing the known material about how to make a bomb, what was known at the time. So it's unclassified now, of course it was classified then, but it's the actual, I think James Conan took these lecture notes, I'm not entirely sure. Let me see. May not say. Anyway, these were lecture notes taken from Robert Serber, Bob Serber, on all what was known at the time. And a guy took the notes and they were typed up. I think the fellow was James Conan, but I'm not sure. You can also get lots of indirect books, like the physicists. You know, there's a lot of discussion about the Manhattan Project in here because the physicists, it took a lot of physics to make the bomb, and chemists and engineers. Some people called it the physicists' war. And I have a lot more to say on that. I may redo this whole talk and replace it because the camera started tilting. But for now, I'm going to wrap it up. So I've just talked about books related to the Manhattan Project, and inclusive in those are a few biographies of J. Robert Oppenheimer. He lived on the west side of New York.